Prepare yourself for a journey where destiny intertwines with forbidden love. In the splendor of ancient Rome, a general acclaimed for his glory in war finds himself inexplicably captivated by a slave, whose dignity and mystery conceal an unimaginable truth. What happens when the most powerful man in Rome discovers that the woman he possesses is, in reality, a Nubian princess, heir to a lost throne, and secrets that could shake empires? Clashes of worlds, unthinkable sacrifices, and a passion that defies all laws await you. Is love strong enough to break the chains of destiny and rewrite history? Curious yet? Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what your favorite period romance is. Prepare your heart, for Chains of Gold is about to begin. The golden eagles of the 10th Legion caught the afternoon sun as they crested the final hill before Rome, their bronze wings seeming to flutter with life against the azure sky of early summer in the year 180 after the birth of Christ. Below them stretched the eternal city in all her marble glory, her 7 hills crowned with temples that gleamed like jewels against the Mediterranean light. The Via Appia thundered beneath the measured steps of 3,000 legionnaires returning home after 3 long years of campaigns in the scorching deserts of Egypt and the treacherous territories beyond, where rebellious tribes allied with various Nubian kingdoms had dared to challenge the might of Rome. At the head of this magnificent procession rode General Marcus Aurelius Maximus, his scarlet cloak billowing behind him like a banner of victory. The bronze cuirass that protected his broad chest bore the dents and scratches of countless battles, each mark a testament to his courage in the field. His dark hair, cropped short in the military fashion, showed premature threads of silver at the temples, the price of command and the weight of decisions that had sent good men to their deaths in foreign lands. Yet it was not the physical toll of war that marked him most deeply, but something far more troubling that lurked behind his steel-grey eyes. The crowds that lined the streets erupted in thunderous cheers as the legion entered the city proper. "Maximus! Maximus!" they chanted, throwing flower petals and strips of colored cloth into the air. Children darted between the legs of the horses, their faces bright with excitement, while merchants hawked wine and honey cakes to the celebrating masses. This was the glory of Rome at its zenith, the triumph of civilization over barbarism, of order over chaos. But as Marcus acknowledged the adulation with raised hand and practiced smile, his heart felt as cold as winter marble. The cheers seemed to echo with the dying screams of women and children he had witnessed in burning villages. The flower petals reminded him of blood scattered across desert sand. 3 years of conquest had brought him fame, wealth, and the gratitude of the Senate, yet each victory had carved away another piece of his soul. The procession wound its way through the Forum Romanum, past the towering columns of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, where senators in their pristine white togas waited to offer their congratulations. Marcus caught sight of his friend Lucius Cornelius Sulla among them, his fair hair gleaming like spun gold, his green eyes bright with genuine pleasure at seeing his comrade safely returned. There would be time later for private conversation, for sharing the truths that could never be spoken in public, the doubts that gnawed at a soldier's conscience in the dark hours before dawn. The villa of the Maximus family sat upon the Palatine Hill, its gardens terraced down the slope in a cascade of green that offered respite from the heat and noise of the city below. As Marcus dismounted in the marble-paved courtyard, slaves hurried forward to take his horse and remove his travel-stained gear. The familiar rituals of homecoming should have brought comfort, yet he felt like a stranger in his own house. "Welcome home, master," intoned Gaius Flavius, the villa's overseer, his stocky frame blocking the entrance as he bowed with perfunctory respect. The man's bald head gleamed with perspiration, and his small dark eyes held the calculating look of one who had grown comfortable in his authority during his master's absence. "All has been prepared for the celebration feast. The household awaits your pleasure." Marcus nodded curtly, his attention already wandering to the slaves who moved about their duties with the efficient silence that spoke of Gaius's harsh discipline. It was then that he saw her, a figure moving through the shadows of the colonnade with a grace that seemed to flow like water over stone. She was tall for a woman, her bronze skin glowing with health despite the simple brown tunic that marked her station. A white veil covered her hair, but could not hide the elegant line of her neck or the proud set of her shoulders. Something about her bearing caught his attention, a quality that seemed at odds with her circumstances. While other slaves hurried about their tasks with downcast eyes and hunched shoulders, this woman moved with an unconscious dignity that spoke of something more than mere survival. When she turned slightly, he glimpsed the profile of her face. High cheekbones that could have been carved by a master sculptor, full lips that suggested both strength and sensuality, and dark eyes that held depths he could not fathom. The evening feast was a magnificent affair, as befitted the return of a conquering hero. The triclinium glowed with the light of 100 oil lamps, their flames dancing across frescoed walls that depicted scenes of Roman victories in lands both near and far. The air was heavy with the scent of roasted peacock, honeyed wine, and exotic spices brought from the furthest reaches of the empire. Senators and their wives reclined on silk-cushioned couches, their conversation a musical blend of politics, gossip, and flattery. Marcus found himself watching the Nubian slave as she moved between the couches, her amphora of wine balanced perfectly on her shoulder. Unlike the other servants who scurried about their duties with nervous haste, she seemed to glide through the room with an almost regal composure. When she approached his couch to refill his cup, he noticed the delicate bones of her hands, the graceful curve of her wrists, and the way she held herself with unconscious pride. "Your wine, General," she said, her voice low and melodious, carrying an accent that spoke of distant lands and forgotten kingdoms. The Latin that flowed from her lips was flawless, each word precisely pronounced with an education that seemed impossible for one in her position. As she leaned forward to pour, the sleeve of her tunic slipped back slightly, revealing a glimpse of her forearm. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he saw what appeared to be an intricate pattern etched into her bronze skin. Not the crude brand of ownership that marked most slaves, but something far more deliberate and meaningful. The design resembled the sacred Ankh of Egypt, but with additional symbols that seemed to dance in the lamplight before disappearing again beneath the fabric. Their eyes met for the briefest of moments, and Marcus felt as though he had been struck by lightning. In those dark depths, he saw intelligence that burned like a flame, pain that cut deeper than any sword, and something else, a strength that had not been broken despite whatever trials she had endured. The connection lasted only a heartbeat before she lowered her gaze and moved on to the next guest, but it was enough to leave him shaken to his very core. "Magnificent feast, Marcus," boomed Senator Quintus Fabius Maximus, his wine-flushed face beaming with satisfaction. "The spoils of your campaigns have certainly enhanced the glory of your household. That Nubian girl, quite exotic. Where did you acquire her?" Marcus found himself bristling at the casual way the senator spoke of her, as though she were merely another piece of plunder to be catalogued and appraised. "She came with a group of captives from the southern territories," he replied carefully, though in truth he could not recall the specific circumstances of her arrival. "Gaius handles such matters." The conversation moved on to other topics: the political situation in Germania, the latest philosophical writings of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the rising cost of grain. But Marcus found his attention continually drawn to the mysterious slave. There was something about her that nagged at his consciousness, a puzzle that demanded solving. It was then that disaster struck with the swiftness of divine intervention. As the Nubian woman approached the couch of Senator Lucius Cassius, Her foot caught on the edge of a decorative rug. The amphora tilted dangerously, and despite her quick reflexes, a stream of dark red wine splashed across the senator's pristine white toga. The room fell silent, as though a funeral shroud had been cast over the gathering. Senator Cassius, a man known for his volatile temper and cruel treatment of slaves, rose to his feet with murder in his eyes. "Clumsy barbarian!" he roared, his hand moving instinctively toward the dagger at his belt. "You'll pay for this insult with your hide." But before he could take another step, the woman did something that stunned everyone present. Instead of cowering or pleading for mercy, as any reasonable slave would do, she straightened to her full height and looked the senator directly in the eye. "Forgive me, honored senator," she said, her voice carrying a dignity that seemed to fill the room. "The fault is mine alone, and I accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate, but know that the stain upon your toga is nothing compared to the stain that cruelty leaves upon the soul." "Ooh?" The audacity of her words sent a collective gasp through the assembled guests. No slave had ever dared to speak so boldly to a member of the Senate, let alone offer what amounted to a philosophical rebuke. Senator Cassius's face turned purple with rage, but before he could respond, Marcus found himself rising from his own couch. "Peace, Cassius," he said, his voice carrying the authority of command that had led legions into battle. "The girl meant no harm, and wine can be washed from cloth far more easily than blood can be washed from marble. Let us not allow such a small accident to mar the joy of this celebration." The tension in the room was palpable as the two men faced each other across the space between their couches. Marcus could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, the unspoken questions that his intervention had raised. Why would a general of Rome defend a mere slave? What possible interest could he have in her welfare? Senator Cassius seemed to wrestle with his anger for a long moment before the political wisdom of not antagonizing a war hero overcame his wounded pride. "As you wish, Maximus," he said through gritted teeth, "but I trust you will ensure that your slaves are better trained in the future." The feast continued, but the easy atmosphere of celebration had been irreparably damaged. Conversations became more subdued, and Marcus noticed several guests casting speculative glances between himself and the Nubian woman. He had acted on instinct, driven by something he could not name, but he knew that his intervention would not go unnoticed or unremarked upon in the gossip mills of Roman society. The dawn that followed brought with it the golden light of a new day, and the promise of answers to questions that had plagued Marcus through a sleepless night. He rose early, as was his custom, and made his way to the library that served as his private sanctuary within the villa. The room was a testament to his love of learning, its walls lined with scrolls and codices that contained the wisdom of ages. Here he had spent countless hours in his youth, absorbing the teachings of philosophers and historians, preparing himself for the responsibilities that would one day be his. But as he entered the familiar space, Marcus stopped short in amazement. The library had been completely transformed. Where once the scrolls had been arranged haphazardly according to size and availability of shelf space, now they were organized with a precision that spoke of deep knowledge and careful thought. Works of history were grouped together by period and region. Philosophical treatises were arranged by school of thought, and literary works were organized by both author and genre. The transformation was so complete and so obviously the work of someone with extensive education that Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. This was not the random tidying of an industrious servant, but the systematic organization of a trained scholar. As he examined the new arrangement more closely, he noticed that several scrolls had been moved from positions where they had obviously been misplaced to locations that made far more sense given their content. "Master." The voice from the doorway made him turn, and he saw Helena, the Greek slave who had served as his librarian for the past 5 years. She was a woman of middle years, her graying hair pulled back in a simple knot, her intelligent brown eyes reflecting both respect and concern. "I hope you are pleased with the changes. I must confess, they are not my doing." Then who? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Helena's expression grew troubled. The new girl, Master, the Nubian. She appeared here yesterday morning while I was attending to other duties. When I returned, I found her examining the scrolls with an intensity that seemed unusual for one of her station. She claimed to be cleaning, but I observed her reading the titles with obvious comprehension. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Reading? You are certain? More than reading, Master. She was correcting the placement of several works that I had shelved incorrectly. When I questioned her about it, she claimed that it simply seemed more logical to group them as she had done. But her explanations revealed a knowledge of Roman literature and history that no ordinary slave should possess. The implications of Helena's words struck Marcus like a physical blow. If the Nubian woman could read Latin with such fluency, if she possessed the education necessary to organize a scholarly library, then what was she doing in chains? What circumstances could have reduced someone of obvious learning and refinement to the status of property? Has she given any indication of her background? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the turmoil in his thoughts. Helena shook her head slowly. She speaks little, Master, and when she does, it is with the careful words of one who has learned to guard her tongue. But there are moments when she forgets herself, when she looks at a particular text or hears a certain phrase. And I see something in her eyes that speaks of great loss. Whatever her past, I believe it was far different from her present circumstances. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, his mind racing with possibilities. The mysterious slave was becoming more intriguing by the hour, and he found himself drawn to her puzzle with an intensity that surprised him. There was something about her that called to him, something that awakened feelings he had thought buried beneath years of military discipline and emotional armor. As if summoned by his thoughts, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond. Marcus turned toward the doorway just as Gaius Flavius appeared, his broad frame filling the entrance, and his expression dark with barely contained anger. "General," the overseer said, his voice tight with frustration, "I must speak with you about the Nubian girl. Her behavior has become increasingly problematic, and I fear her influence is beginning to affect the other slaves." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" "She dared to question my calculations regarding the grain supplies, claiming that my figures were incorrect. When I demanded to know how a barbarian slave could presume to understand such matters, she proceeded to demonstrate errors in my arithmetic that I had not noticed." Gaius's face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "Such insubordination cannot be tolerated, General. The other slaves are beginning to look to her with something approaching respect, and that is a dangerous precedent." The overseer's words only served to deepen the mystery surrounding the woman. Mathematical skills, literacy, organizational ability, these were not the talents typically found among the human chattel that filled the slave markets of Rome. Marcus found himself curious about what other surprises she might reveal. "What punishment do you recommend?" he asked, though something deep within him rebelled at the thought of causing her harm. "A public flogging would serve as an example to the others," Gaius replied with obvious relish. 20 lashes should be sufficient to remind her of her place and discourage any further displays of arrogance." The image of that bronze skin marked by the overseer's whip sent a surge of protective anger through Marcus that surprised him with its intensity. "No," he said firmly, his voice carrying the tone of absolute command that had never been questioned on the battlefield. "There will be no flogging. The woman's intelligence, however unusual, is not a crime. Perhaps we should be grateful to have a slave capable of useful work rather than punishing her for it." Gaius's mouth fell open in shock. "But General, such leniency will be seen as weakness. The slaves must know their place, or discipline will collapse entirely." "The slaves will know their place because I command it," Marcus replied coldly. "And their place is to serve this household efficiently and well. If this woman can improve our operations through her skills, then we should make use of those skills rather than destroying them out of petty pride. The overseer's face darkened further, but he knew better than to argue with his master's direct orders. "As you command, General," he said through gritted teeth. "But I warn you that such favoritism will not go unnoticed. The other slaves are already whispering about your interest in the girl." The implication in Gaius's words was clear, and Marcus felt his temper flare. "My interest is in the efficient management of my household," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I suggest you focus your attention on your own duties rather than concerning yourself with matters that are beyond your understanding." Gaius bowed stiffly and withdrew, but not before Marcus caught the calculating look in his eyes. The overseer was clearly displeased with this turn of events, and Marcus suspected that he would bear watching in the days to come. The second evening's banquet was a more intimate affair, with only a select group of close friends and political allies in attendance. The conversation flowed more freely without the formal constraints of a large gathering, and Marcus found himself able to relax for the first time since his return. The wine was excellent, the food perfectly prepared, and the company congenial. Yet he found his attention continually drawn to the Nubian slave as she moved silently about her duties. Tonight she seemed different somehow, more subdued than she had been the previous evening. Her movements retained their characteristic grace, but there was a tension in her shoulders that spoke of some inner turmoil. When she approached his couch to refill his wine cup, Marcus noticed that her hands trembled almost imperceptibly, and her dark eyes seemed to hold shadows that had not been there before. As she leaned forward to pour, the sleeve of her tunic once again slipped back, revealing more of the mysterious marking on her wrist. In the clearer light of the smaller gathering, Marcus could see that it was indeed more complex than he had first realized. The central ankh was surrounded by smaller symbols that seemed to tell a story in a language he did not recognize, but which spoke of significance far beyond mere decoration. "Your wine, General," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he replied, allowing his fingers to brush against hers as he took the cup. The contact was brief, lasting no more than a heartbeat, but it sent a shock of awareness through him that was both unexpected and disturbing. Her skin was warm and soft, a stark contrast to the calluses that marked her palms, evidence of hard labor that seemed at odds with her obvious refinement. She started at the touch, her eyes flying to meet his, with an expression of surprise and something that might have been fear. For a moment they stared at each other across the small space that separated them, and Marcus felt as though he were looking into the depths of a mystery that might take a lifetime to solve. Then she lowered her gaze and moved away, but not before he caught a glimpse of tears gathering in her dark eyes. The sight of those unshed tears affected him more profoundly than he cared to admit. What sorrows did she carry? What memories haunted her in the quiet hours of the night? The questions multiplied in his mind, each one adding to the growing fascination that she held for him. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed more freely, the conversation turned to philosophical matters, the nature of justice, the responsibilities of power, the price of civilization. Marcus found himself thinking of the woman's words from the previous night, her bold assertion that cruelty stained the soul. There had been wisdom in those words, a depth of understanding that spoke of experience with both suffering and redemption. The storm came without warning, as summer storms often did in Rome. One moment the evening air was still and warm, filled with the gentle murmur of conversation and the soft music of a lyre. The next, the sky exploded with thunder that shook the very foundations of the villa, and lightning split the darkness with brilliant white fire. The guests exclaimed in surprise and delight at the sudden display of nature's power. But Marcus found himself thinking of other storms he had weathered, the sandstorms of Egypt that could strip flesh from bone, the winter gales of Germania that froze a man's blood in his veins. This Roman storm was tame by comparison, yet something about it filled him with unease. As the rain began to fall in heavy sheets against the windows, Marcus excused himself from the gathering and made his way through the corridors of his villa. He told himself that he was simply checking to ensure that all was secure, that the slaves had taken proper precautions against the weather. But in truth, he was drawn by an impulse he could not name, a feeling that something was wrong. The library was dark when he entered, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the room, in stark black and white. At first, he thought it was empty, but then another flash revealed a figure huddled in the far corner, pressed against the wall, as though trying to disappear into the stone itself. It was the Nubian woman, but she was transformed by terror into something barely recognizable. Her entire body shook with tremors that had nothing to do with cold, and her lips moved in what sounded like prayers or pleas spoken in a language he had never heard before. Her eyes were wide and staring, but they seemed to see not the familiar confines of the library, but some other place entirely, a place of horror and death. "Father!" she cried out suddenly, her voice breaking with anguish. "Mother! They're coming through the gates! The fire! Oh gods, the fire!" Marcus approached her slowly, as he might approach a wounded animal, his heart clenching at the raw pain in her voice. Whatever she was reliving, it was real to her in this moment, as real as the stone beneath their feet and the storm raging outside. "The children," she whispered, her voice dropping to a broken murmur. "They killed the children first, made us watch. Made us—" Her words dissolved into sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Unable to bear her suffering any longer, Marcus knelt beside her and reached out to touch her shoulder gently. "You are safe," he said softly. "Whatever you are seeing, it is in the past. You are safe now." She flinched at his touch as though expecting a blow, her eyes focusing on him with difficulty. For a moment she seemed not to recognize him, seeing instead some figure from her nightmare. Then awareness returned, and with it came a shame that was almost painful to witness. "Forgive me, master," she whispered, struggling to compose herself. "I did not mean to. The storm brought back memories that I tried to keep buried." "What memories?" he asked gently, though he suspected the answer would be more terrible than he was prepared to hear. She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself as though trying to hold the pieces of her shattered composure together. "Nothing that should concern you, master. I am merely a foolish woman frightened by thunder." But Marcus had seen too much of war and its aftermath to be deceived by such protestations. The terror in her eyes spoke of experiences that went far beyond natural fear, experiences that had left scars on her soul as surely as any blade might mark her flesh. "Tell me," he said, his voice carrying a note of command that was softened by genuine concern. "What happened to you? What brought you to Rome?" For a long moment she was silent, her dark eyes searching his face as though trying to determine whether he could be trusted with the truth. Then slowly she began to speak. "I was not always a slave, master. Once I lived in a place where the sun painted the desert gold and the river ran like a ribbon of life through the heart of our land. I had a family, parents who loved me, brothers who protected me, a future that stretched before me like a promise." Her voice grew distant, as though she were seeing that lost world in the shadows of the library. "What happened to them?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "They died," she said simply, the words falling like stones into the silence between them. "All of them, murdered by those who sought to steal what was not theirs to take. I alone survived, and sometimes I wonder if that was a mercy or a curse." The pain in her voice was so raw, so immediate, that Marcus felt it like a physical blow. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand in his, offering what comfort he could through simple human contact. Her fingers were cold, despite the warmth of the evening, and he could feel the tremors that still ran through her slender frame. "I am sorry," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. "No one should have to endure such loss." She looked down at their joined hands with an expression of wonder, as though she had forgotten what gentle touch felt like. "You are kind, master. Kinder than I have any right to expect." "My name is Marcus," he said impulsively. "When we are alone like this, you need not call me master." The suggestion seemed to shock her more than his kindness had. "I could not," she protested. "It would not be proper. You are a general of Rome, and I am—" "You are a woman who has suffered more than any person should," he interrupted. "Your circumstances do not define your worth, any more than my rank defines mine." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside, while something far more subtle but equally powerful stirred in the space between them. Marcus found himself studying her profile in the intermittent lightning, noting the proud line of her nose, the delicate curve of her ear, the way her lips trembled slightly with each breath. "What is your name?" he asked finally. She hesitated, as though the question carried dangers he could not imagine. "I am called Zahara, master, Marcus." "Zahara," he repeated, tasting the exotic syllables on his tongue. "It is beautiful. What does it mean?" "Flower," she said softly. "In my language it means flower. My mother chose it because she said I bloomed like a desert rose, beautiful but strong enough to survive in harsh places." The metaphor was more apt than she might have realized. Looking at her now, Marcus could see both the beauty and the strength she spoke of, the delicate features that spoke of refinement and breeding, and the steel in her spine that had allowed her to endure whatever horrors had brought her to this place. As the storm began to subside, its thunder growing more distant and its lightning less frequent, Marcus became aware of how close they were sitting. Her hand was still in his, her dark eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made his heart race. The air between them seemed charged with something more powerful than the electricity that had split the sky. "I should go," she whispered, but made no move to rise. "Yes," he agreed, but his grip on her hand tightened rather than loosened. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they remained frozen in that tableau, a Roman general and a Nubian slave, separated by law and custom and the vast gulf of their different stations, yet connected by something that transcended all such barriers. Marcus felt as though he stood at the edge of a precipice, knowing that one more step would send him tumbling into an abyss from which there might be no return. It was Zahara who broke the spell, gently pulling her hand from his and rising to her feet with fluid grace. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your kindness. I will not forget it." She moved toward the door like a shadow, but paused at the threshold to look back at him. In that final glance, Marcus saw something that made his breath catch, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the connection that had sparked between them. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the dying storm and the echo of her words. As the last rumbles of thunder faded into the distance, Marcus remained in the library, his mind reeling with the implications of what had just occurred. In the space of a few hours, his carefully ordered world had been turned upside down by a woman whose very existence challenged everything he thought he knew about justice, honor, and the natural order of things. Helena appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Master, I heard voices and thought perhaps you needed assistance." "No," Marcus said, rising slowly to his feet. "I was merely checking on the scrolls, making sure the storm had not caused any damage." The Greek woman's intelligent eyes took in his disheveled appearance and the lingering tension in the air. "Of course, master. Shall I ensure that all the slaves have returned to their quarters safely?" "Yes," he said, grateful for her discretion. "That would be wise." As Helena withdrew, Marcus made his way to the window and stared out at the rain-washed garden. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and fresh, but he knew that his own internal tempest was just beginning. Something had awakened in him tonight, something dangerous and powerful and utterly beyond his control. In the slave quarters, Zahara lay on her narrow pallet and stared at the ceiling, her heart still racing from her encounter with the general. She had revealed too much, allowed him to see past the careful mask she had worn for so long. It was dangerous, more dangerous than she could afford, yet she could not bring herself to regret it. For the first time in 5 years, someone had looked at her and seen not just a slave, but a human being worthy of compassion. The memory of his gentle touch, the warmth in his grey eyes, the way he had said her name, these things would sustain her through whatever trials lay ahead. But even as she treasured these moments, Zahara knew that she was walking a path fraught with peril. The general was beginning to ask questions, to notice things that others had overlooked. How long could she maintain her deception? How long before someone discovered the truth about who she really was? In his own chambers, Marcus lay sleepless as well, his mind filled with images of dark eyes and bronze skin, of pain too deep for tears and strength too great for chains. The woman called Zahara had awakened something in him that he had thought dead, a capacity for feeling that went beyond duty and honor and the cold calculations of military strategy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions that demanded answers. But tonight, in the aftermath of the storm, Marcus allowed himself to acknowledge a truth that would change everything. He was falling in love with a woman whose very existence was a mystery, and whose secrets might destroy them both. Outside, the last drops of rain fell like tears upon the marble stones of Rome, washing away the dust of the day, but leaving behind the promise of revelations yet to come. The general had returned home a conqueror, but he would discover that the greatest battles are not always fought with sword and shield, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that lives within the chambers of the heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the villa as Marcus made his way to the library, his mind still haunted by the events of the previous night. Sleep had eluded him completely, his thoughts consumed by images of Zahara's tear-stained face and the raw pain in her voice as she spoke of her lost family. The memory of her hand in his, warm and trembling, had burned in his consciousness like a brand, marking him with feelings he was not prepared to acknowledge. The library welcomed him with its familiar scent of parchment and ink, but even this sanctuary could not provide the peace he sought. Instead, Marcus found himself drawn to implement a plan that had formed in the sleepless hours before dawn. A test that might reveal more about the mysterious woman who had so thoroughly disrupted his carefully ordered world. With deliberate precision, he selected a scroll containing the philosophical writings of Epictetus, the great Stoic teacher who had himself been born a slave. The irony was not lost on him as he unrolled the parchment and located a particular passage about the nature of freedom and bondage. Using a reed pen, he deliberately altered several key words, creating errors that would be obvious to anyone with genuine understanding of Stoic philosophy. Then he left the scroll open on his reading table, positioned where it could not be missed by anyone entering the room. The day passed with agonizing slowness as Marcus attended to the mundane business of his household and his obligations to the city. He met with his steward to review the accounts from his estates, received a delegation of merchants seeking his endorsement for a new trade venture, and endured a lengthy visit from Senator Cassius, who seemed determined to discuss every detail of the previous evening's wine incident. Through it all, Marcus found his thoughts returning again and again to the library and the test he had set. When evening finally arrived, he made his way back to his sanctuary with a heart that beat faster than it should. The scroll lay exactly where he had left it, but as he approached the reading table, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. There, written in the margins in a hand that was both elegant and precise, were corrections to every error he had made. But these were not simple corrections. They were accompanied by commentary that demonstrated a deep understanding of Stoic principles and their practical applications. The handwriting itself was a revelation. Each letter was formed with the careful precision of someone who had been taught by master scribes, the spacing and proportion speaking of years of dedicated practice. This was not the crude scrawl of someone who had learned to read as an adult, but the refined script of someone educated from childhood in the highest traditions of learning. Marcus sank into his chair, staring at the annotated text with a mixture of wonder and growing certainty. No ordinary slave could have produced such work. The depth of understanding revealed in those marginal notes spoke of an education that would have been available only to the highest levels of society, royalty, nobility, or the children of the wealthiest merchant families. "Master?" Helena's voice from the doorway interrupted his contemplation. The Greek woman entered with her usual quiet efficiency, but Marcus noticed that her eyes immediately went to the open scroll on his table. "Helena," he said carefully, "did you have occasion to examine this text today?" The librarian approached and glanced at the parchment, her expression growing troubled as she took in the marginal annotations. "No, master. I have been occupied with cataloguing the new acquisitions from your campaigns, but I see that someone has been studying your collection." "The handwriting," Marcus said, pointing to the elegant script. "Have you seen its like before?" Helena leaned closer, her scholarly instincts overcoming her usual deference. "It is exceptional, master. The formation of the letters, the consistency of the spacing. This is the work of someone trained by master scribes. In my years of service to learned men, I have seen few hands so accomplished." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as his suspicions crystallized into near certainty. "And the content of the annotations?" "Brilliant," Helena admitted reluctantly. "Whoever wrote these comments possesses a profound understanding of Stoic philosophy. The insights are original and sophisticated, the work of a true scholar." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor. Both he and Helena turned toward the entrance just as Zahara appeared in the doorway, carrying a basin of water and clean cloths for the evening cleaning of the library. She froze when she saw them standing over the annotated scroll, her dark eyes widening with what looked like fear. "Forgive me, master," she said quickly, backing toward the door. "I did not realize you were occupied. I will return later to attend to my duties." "Wait!" Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had never been questioned on the battlefield. "Come here." Zahara approached with obvious reluctance, her gaze fixed on the floor and her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the cleaning supplies. When she reached the table, Marcus gestured toward the open scroll. "Look at this," he said quietly. "Tell me what you see." She glanced at the parchment for only a moment before lowering her eyes again. "I see writing, master, but I cannot read such learned words." The lie was so obvious that Marcus felt a surge of frustration. "Cannot read, or will not admit that you can." Zahara's composure cracked slightly, and he saw her jaw tighten with what might have been anger or fear. "I am only a slave, master. What use would I have for such knowledge?" "Perhaps," Marcus said, his voice deceptively calm, "the same use that led you to reorganize my entire library with the skill of a trained scholar." The accusation hung in the air between them like a blade, and Marcus watched as Zahara struggled with the decision of whether to continue her deception or reveal more of the truth. Finally, she raised her eyes to meet his, and he saw in their depths a resignation that spoke of someone who had carried secrets too long. "I had some education before my capture," she admitted quietly. "My father believed that knowledge was a treasure that could never be stolen, so he ensured that I learned to read and write in several languages. I did not think it would matter here." "Several languages," Helena interjected, her scholarly curiosity overcoming her usual discretion. "Which ones?" Zahara hesitated, clearly calculating how much she dared reveal. "Latin, as you have seen, Greek, some Egyptian hieroglyphs, and the tongue of my own people." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The ability to read hieroglyphs was rare even among educated Romans, requiring years of specialized study. For a merchant's daughter from Nubia to possess such knowledge was not impossible, but it was highly unusual. "Show me," he said, moving to a shelf and selecting a scroll containing Egyptian religious texts. "If you can truly read hieroglyphs, prove it." He unrolled the parchment and pointed to a passage describing the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Zahara looked at the ancient symbols for a long moment, and Marcus could see her internal struggle playing out across her expressive features. Finally, she began to speak. "It tells of the weighing of the heart," she said, her voice taking on a musical quality as she translated the sacred text. "When the soul departs the body, it must journey through the underworld to face the judgment of Osiris. The heart is placed upon the scales against the feather of Maat, and if it is found to be pure, the soul may enter the eternal fields of peace." The translation was not only accurate, but delivered with a reverence that spoke of deep understanding of the religious concepts involved. Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance with Helena, who looked as stunned as he felt. "Where did you learn this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father," Zahara replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested she was not telling the complete truth. He traded with Egyptian merchants and believed it was important to understand their customs and beliefs. It was a plausible explanation, but Marcus sensed there was more to the story. The depth of her knowledge, the reverent way she had spoken of the sacred texts, suggested a connection to Egyptian religion that went beyond mere commercial necessity. The days that followed established a pattern that both thrilled and tormented Marcus. Unable to sleep, he took to walking the corridors and gardens of his villa in the dark hours before dawn, seeking in physical movement some relief from the restless energy that consumed him. It was during one of these nocturnal wanderings that he discovered he was not alone in his sleeplessness. She stood in the center of the garden like a statue carved from bronze and moonlight, her face turned toward the star-filled sky and her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold together something that threatened to break apart. Tears streamed down her cheeks in silver tracks, and her lips moved in what appeared to be silent prayers or pleas spoken in her native tongue. Marcus remained in the shadows of the colonnade, unwilling to intrude upon her private grief, yet unable to tear himself away from the sight of her pain. There was something almost sacred about her sorrow, a dignity in her suffering that made his heart ache with sympathy and something deeper that he was not yet ready to name. As he watched, Zahara suddenly pressed a hand to her mouth and rushed toward a cluster of flowering bushes at the garden's edge. The sound of retching carried clearly in the still night air, followed by soft sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Marcus took a step forward, instinctively wanting to offer comfort, but stopped himself as she straightened and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. When she turned back toward the villa, Marcus quickly retreated deeper into the shadows, but not before he caught a glimpse of her face in the moonlight. She looked pale and shaken, one hand pressed protectively to her stomach in a gesture that sent a chill of recognition through him. He had seen that gesture before, in the wives of his soldiers when they carried new life within them. The possibility that struck him was so unexpected, so fraught with implications, that Marcus felt his knees weaken. Could it be that their single night of passionate connection had already borne fruit? The timing would be right, and her behavior, the tears, the sickness, the protective gesture, all pointed toward the same conclusion. As Zahara disappeared into the villa, Marcus remained in the garden, his mind reeling with the potential consequences of what he had witnessed. If his suspicions were correct, then their situation had become infinitely more complicated. A slave carrying her master's child faced a precarious future at best, and if that slave harbored secrets as dangerous as he suspected Zahara did, the risks multiplied exponentially. The following morning brought an unexpected discovery that only deepened the mystery surrounding Zahara. Marcus had gone to inspect repairs being made to the slave quarters, a duty he normally delegated to Gaius, but which he now found himself undertaking personally. As he examined the work being done on the roof, a loose tile shifted under his foot, revealing a small cavity in the wall below. Something golden caught the light from within the hiding place, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Glancing around to ensure he was unobserved, he reached into the cavity and withdrew an object that made his breath catch in his throat. It was an amulet of exquisite craftsmanship, fashioned from gold so pure it seemed to glow with inner fire. The central design was an ankh, the Egyptian symbol of life, but it was surrounded by hieroglyphs and other symbols that spoke of significance far beyond mere decoration. The workmanship was extraordinary, clearly the product of master craftsmen working with materials of the highest quality. This was not the sort of ornament that would be owned by a merchant's daughter, no matter how successful her father's business might have been. This was a piece fit for royalty, imbued with religious and political significance that made Marcus's hands tremble as he held it. Before he could examine the amulet more closely, the sound of approaching footsteps forced him to quickly replace it in its hiding place and step away from the wall. Zahara appeared moments later, carrying a basket of mending, her eyes immediately going to the spot where Marcus stood. "Master," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "is there something wrong with the repairs?" "No," Marcus replied, studying her face for any sign that she suspected what he had discovered. "I was merely ensuring that the work meets my standards." But he saw the way her gaze flickered toward the wall where the amulet was hidden, and the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes that spoke of fear carefully controlled. She knew that he had found something, even if she could not be certain what it was. That evening, Helena approached Marcus in his study with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Master," she said, closing the door carefully behind her, "I must speak with you about the Nubian girl." Marcus set aside the correspondence he had been reviewing and gave her his full attention. "What about her?" "I have been observing her, as you requested," Helena said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Today, I witnessed something that confirms my suspicions about her background. She was examining the Egyptian texts in your collection, not just reading them, but studying them with the intensity of a scholar. When she came to a passage describing royal burial rituals, I saw her lips move as though she were reciting along with the text." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Reciting? As though she had memorized it?" "Exactly," Helena confirmed. "But more than that, Master. When she reached a section describing the specific rituals reserved for members of the royal family, I saw her touch her throat in a gesture that seemed almost involuntary. It was as though she were remembering something, or someone, connected to those sacred rites." The implications of Helena's observation struck Marcus like a physical blow. If Zahara possessed intimate knowledge of royal burial rituals, if she reacted to them with the familiarity of personal memory rather than academic study, then her true identity might be far more significant than even he had suspected. "There is more," Helena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I have been researching the hieroglyphs and symbols associated with various Nubian kingdoms. The style of writing that she demonstrated, the particular dialect of Egyptian that she speaks, these are consistent with the royal court of Dongola, a kingdom that was destroyed 5 years ago in a civil war." Marcus felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place with terrifying clarity. 5 years ago, the same time frame that Zahara had mentioned for her capture and enslavement. The same period when the royal family of Dongola had reportedly been massacred, with only rumors and whispers suggesting that some members might have escaped. "What happened to the royal family?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Officially, they were all killed," Helena replied. "But there were stories, unconfirmed reports that the youngest princess had disappeared during the final battle. Some said she was dead, others claimed she had been taken captive. The truth was never established." The room seemed to spin around Marcus as the full implications of Helena's words sank in. If Zahara was indeed the lost princess of Dongola, then he was not merely harboring a runaway slave, he was protecting the rightful heir to a kingdom, a woman whose very existence could destabilize the political balance of the entire region. As the days passed, Marcus found himself drawn into an increasingly dangerous game of discovery and concealment. He began testing Zahara systematically, leaving texts in various languages scattered throughout the villa and observing her reactions. A scroll written in ancient Nubian script left on a table in the garden caused her to stop and stare for long minutes, her face cycling through emotions that ranged from longing to despair. A map of the Nile Valley and its tributaries, casually displayed in his study, drew her attention like a lodestone, and he caught her tracing the course of rivers with her finger as though following familiar paths home. Their conversations, which had begun as simple exchanges between master and slave, evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Marcus found himself seeking her out, creating excuses to discuss philosophy, literature, and the customs of distant lands. Zahara, for her part, seemed unable to maintain her facade of ignorance when faced with subjects that clearly fascinated her. "Tell me about the stars," Marcus said one evening as they stood together in the garden, ostensibly discussing the care of the flowering plants, but actually engaged in a much more intimate form of communication. Zahara looked up at the night sky, her face softening with an expression of such longing that Marcus felt his heart clench. "In my homeland," she said softly, "we believed that the stars were the souls of our ancestors, watching over us and guiding our paths. Each constellation told a story of heroes and gods, of love and loss, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness." "And which star was yours?" Marcus asked, moving closer to her in the darkness. She pointed toward a bright star in the constellation of the Lion. "That one. My mother said it was the Star of Queens, destined to shine brightest in the darkest hours." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Queens," he repeated softly. "An interesting choice for a merchant's daughter." Zahara stiffened, realizing that she had revealed more than she intended. "My mother had romantic notions," she said quickly. "She filled my head with stories and dreams that had no place in the real world." But Marcus was no longer deceived by her attempts at misdirection. The way she had spoken of queens and royal stars, the unconscious authority in her bearing, the depth of her education, all of it pointed toward a truth that was both wonderful and terrible. It was Gaius Flavius who forced the situation toward its inevitable crisis. The overseer had been watching the growing relationship between Marcus and Zahara with increasing resentment and suspicion. The protection that Marcus afforded her, the obvious favoritism he showed, the way he defended her against punishment, all of it fed Gaius's conviction that his master was being manipulated by a clever slave who had somehow bewitched him. "General," Gaius said one morning as Marcus reviewed the household accounts, "I must speak with you about a matter of grave concern." Marcus looked up from his scrolls, noting the calculating expression in the overseer's eyes. "What matter?" "Your relationship with the Nubian slave," Gaius said carefully. "The other slaves are talking, and I fear that word of your interest in her may reach ears that could use such information against you." The threat was barely veiled, and Marcus felt his temper flare. "Are you suggesting that I am conducting myself inappropriately?" "I am suggesting that appearances matter, General," Gaius replied smoothly. "A man in your position cannot afford to have his reputation tarnished by rumors of improper conduct with a slave. Your political enemies would be delighted to use such gossip to undermine your standing with the Senate." Marcus rose from his chair, his full height and military bearing making the overseer take an involuntary step backward. "My conduct is beyond reproach," he said coldly, "and I will not tolerate insinuations to the contrary from anyone, regardless of their position in this household." But even as he dismissed Gaius with a curt gesture, Marcus knew that the man's words contained a kernel of truth. His growing obsession with Zahara had not gone unnoticed, and in the political climate of Rome, even the appearance of impropriety could be weaponized by those who sought to destroy him. The confrontation that had been building for days finally came to a head on an evening when the summer heat lay over the villa like a suffocating blanket. Marcus had been pacing his study, unable to concentrate on his correspondence, when Zahara appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of wine and fruit. "I thought you might be thirsty, master," she said, but her voice carried a tremor that spoke of nervousness. Marcus gestured for her to enter, watching as she moved across the room with that fluid grace that never failed to captivate him. As she set the tray on his desk, their hands brushed, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity through him that was impossible to ignore. "Zahara," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "I must ask you something, and I want the truth." She straightened, her dark eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and resignation. "What do you wish to know? Who are you?" The question hung between them like a sword. "And do not tell me again that you are merely a merchant's daughter. I have seen too much, learned too much, to believe that fiction any longer." For a long moment, Zahara was silent, her internal struggle playing out across her expressive features. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was born free," she said, the words coming slowly as though each one cost her dearly. "My father was indeed a merchant, but he was also more than that. We lived in a place where the desert met the river, where ancient traditions still held sway, and the old gods were still honored." "And your mother?" Marcus pressed, sensing that she was still holding back crucial information. "My mother was—" Zahara's voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as though trying to hold back words that threatened to spill out. "She was beautiful and wise and kind. She taught me to read the stars and to understand the sacred texts. She said that knowledge was power and that power carried responsibility." Marcus moved closer to her, drawn by the pain in her voice and the tears that had begun to flow down her cheeks. "What happened to them? To your family?" "They were murdered," Zahara said, the words coming out in a rush of anguish. "All of them, slaughtered like animals by men who wanted to steal what was not theirs to take. I watched them die, Marcus. I watched my world burn and my people fall, and I could do nothing to stop it." The use of his name, spoken without the formal address of master or general, struck Marcus like a physical blow. In that moment, all pretense fell away, and he saw her not as a slave or a puzzle to be solved, but as a woman in agony, carrying burdens that would have crushed a weaker spirit. Without thinking, he reached for her, pulling her into his arms and holding her as she wept for losses that could never be recovered. She felt so small against his chest, so fragile, yet he could sense the steel in her spine that had allowed her to survive when others had perished. "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair, breathing in the scent of jasmine and something else that was uniquely her. "So very sorry for your pain." She pulled back to look at him, her tear-stained face luminous in the lamplight. "You do not understand," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should hate you. You represent everything that destroyed my world, everything that took my family from me. But I cannot. God help me, I cannot." The confession hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm, and Marcus felt his heart stop as he realized what she was saying. Despite everything, despite the circumstances that had brought her to his house, despite the vast gulf that separated their stations, despite the very real dangers that surrounded them, she cared for him as he cared for her. "Zahara," he breathed, his hands framing her face as though she were made of the most precious crystal. "What are we doing?" "Something foolish," she whispered, but she made no move to pull away. "Something dangerous, something that could destroy us both." "I know," Marcus said, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone, "but I cannot seem to stop myself. You have bewitched me, body and soul." The space between them seemed to shimmer with tension, charged with possibilities and fraught with perils. Marcus could feel the warmth of her breath against his lips, could see the way her dark eyes had gone soft with longing that matched his own. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings about the consequences of what he was contemplating, but his heart had already made its choice. When their lips finally met, it was with a passion that had been building for days, a hunger that could no longer be denied. Zahara melted against him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his tunic as though she were drowning, and he was her only anchor. The kiss deepened, became something desperate and consuming, a claiming that went beyond mere physical desire to touch something fundamental in both their souls. But even as Marcus lost himself in the sweetness of her response, Zahara suddenly pushed against his chest, breaking the connection with a gasp that sounded almost like a sob. "No," she whispered, backing away from him with eyes wide with panic. "We cannot. You do not understand what you are doing." "I understand perfectly," Marcus said, his voice rough with desire and frustration. "I am falling in love with you." The words seemed to strike her like physical blows, and she wrapped her arms around herself as though trying to hold together something that threatened to shatter. "You cannot love me," she said, her voice breaking. "You do not know what I am, what I have done, what my very existence could cost you." "Then tell me," Marcus demanded, taking a step toward her. "Stop hiding behind half-truths and evasions. Tell me who you really are." But Zahara was already moving toward the door, her face a mask of anguish and determination. "Some chains can never be broken," she said, echoing the words she had spoken that first night in the library. "Some secrets are too dangerous to share. I am sorry, Marcus, sorrier than you will ever know." And then she was gone, leaving him alone with the taste of her tears on his lips and the echo of her words ringing in his ears. Marcus sank into his chair, his hands shaking as he tried to process what had just occurred. He had crossed a line from which there could be no return, had acknowledged feelings that could destroy everything he had worked to build. But even as he contemplated the potential consequences of his actions, Marcus knew that he could not turn back. Whatever secrets Zahara carried, whatever dangers surrounded her, he was committed now to uncovering the truth. She had awakened something in him that had been dormant for too long, a capacity for love that transcended reason and defied every convention of his ordered world. In her small chamber in the slave quarters, Zahara pressed her back against the closed door and allowed the tears to flow freely. The taste of Marcus's kiss still lingered on her lips, a bittersweet reminder of what could never be. She had been a fool to let him get so close, to allow her carefully constructed defenses to crumble in the face of his kindness and growing affection. But even as she berated herself for her weakness, Zahara could not bring herself to regret those precious moments in his arms. For the first time in 5 years, she had felt truly alive, truly human. The way he had looked at her, the tenderness in his touch, the reverence in his voice when he spoke her name. These things had awakened parts of her that she had thought dead and buried with her family. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, where she was increasingly certain that new life was growing. The signs were unmistakable now, the morning sickness, the tenderness, the strange combination of exhaustion and restless energy that she remembered from watching other women in her former life. She was carrying Marcus's child, a development that added layers of complexity to an already impossible situation. What future could there be for the child of a Roman general and a woman whose true identity could spark wars and topple kingdoms? What hope could there be for a love that violated every law and custom of the society in which they lived? As the night deepened around her, Zahara made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. She could no longer maintain the fiction of being merely a merchant's daughter. Marcus was too intelligent, too observant, and too determined to uncover the truth. Soon, very soon, she would have to reveal who she really was. And when that moment came, she could only pray that the love she had seen in his eyes would be strong enough to survive the revelation of her true identity. In the garden outside, Helena stood in the shadows of the colonnade, having witnessed enough of the evening's events to confirm her growing suspicions. The way the general looked at the Nubian slave, the obvious intimacy between them, the careful dance of revelation and concealment they performed, all of it pointed toward a truth that could reshape the political landscape of the empire. Tomorrow, Helena decided, she would have to make a choice of her own. Loyalty to her master demanded that she protect him from the consequences of his growing obsession. But loyalty to the truth, and to the woman she was increasingly certain was far more than she appeared to be, demanded something else entirely. The stage was set for revelations that would test the bonds of love, loyalty, and honor. In the days to come, all their carefully constructed facades would crumble, and the truth, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, would finally emerge from the shadows where it had hidden for far too long. The morning mist clung to the 7 hills of Rome like the breath of sleeping gods, and in the villa of Marcus Aurelius Maximus, the weight of unspoken truths pressed down upon its inhabitants with the force of an approaching storm. 3 days had passed since the forbidden kiss that had shattered the careful barriers between master and slave, and in those 3 days Marcus had found no peace in sleep, no solace in duty, and no escape from the burning questions that consumed his every waking moment. The scholar's villa nestled in the shadow of the Palatine Hill, its modest exterior concealing one of the most extensive private libraries in all of Rome. Gaius Flavius Maximus, no relation despite the shared name, had devoted his life to the study of the peoples and cultures that lay beyond the empire's borders, and his reputation for knowledge of African kingdoms was unmatched among the learned men of the city. Marcus found him in his study, surrounded by scrolls and papyri that bore the exotic scripts of distant lands. The old scholar looked up from his work with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of decades spent deciphering the mysteries of foreign civilizations. "Marcus, my friend," the scholar said, rising from his chair with the careful movements of advanced age, "what brings the hero of the Germanic campaigns to my humble sanctuary?" "I need your expertise, Gaius," Marcus replied, accepting the offered chair and a cup of watered wine. "I have encountered certain artifacts that bear symbols I do not recognize, African in origin, I believe." The scholar's eyes brightened with interest. "Ah, the spoils of your recent campaigns? I would be delighted to examine them." Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The items are not in my possession at present, but I can describe them in detail. The primary piece appears to be an amulet of exceptional craftsmanship, fashioned from gold of remarkable purity. The central design is an ankh, but it is surrounded by hieroglyphs and other symbols that suggest significance beyond mere decoration." As Marcus continued his description, he watched the scholar's expression change from casual interest to growing concern, and finally to something approaching alarm. When Marcus finished speaking, Gaius Flavius sat in silence for a long moment, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he reached for a particular scroll. "You describe," the scholar said slowly, unrolling the papyrus to reveal detailed drawings of various royal insignia, "what can only be a royal ankh of the kingdom of Dongola. Such artifacts are not merely jewelry, Marcus. They are sacred objects passed down through royal bloodlines for generations. Each one contains specific hieroglyphs that mark the bearer's lineage, their place in the succession, and their divine right to rule." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. "And if such an artifact were to be found in the possession of someone who was not of royal blood?" "Impossible," Gaius Flavius replied firmly. "The creation of these amulets requires knowledge of sacred rituals known only to the highest priests of the royal court. The hieroglyphs themselves are written in a dialect so archaic that only members of the immediate royal family would be taught to read them. To possess such an object, one would have to be—" His voice trailed off as the implication struck him. "Would have to be what?" Marcus pressed, though he dreaded the answer. "A member of the royal family of Dongola," the scholar whispered. "But that is impossible. The last princess of that kingdom disappeared 5 years ago when her uncle Arakamani orchestrated a coup with the backing of certain Roman merchants. The entire royal line was presumed dead. The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each revelation adding another piece to a puzzle that was becoming terrifyingly clear. "Tell me about this princess," he said, his voice barely steady. Gaius Flavius consulted another scroll, his finger tracing lines of text as he spoke. "Princess Amanirenas, daughter of King Natakamani and Queen Amanitore. She would be, let me see, approximately 23 years of age now if she still lived. Educated in the highest traditions of Nubian scholarship, fluent in multiple languages, trained in statecraft and diplomacy. She was said to be exceptionally beautiful, with the bearing of one born to rule." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the world tilt beneath him as every detail matched what he knew of Zahara. The age, the education, the unmistakable nobility of bearing that no amount of slavery could erase. It all fit with devastating precision. "What happened during the coup?" he asked, though he was no longer certain he wanted to know. Arakamani had been passed over for the succession in favor of his brother, the princess's father, the scholar explained. He spent years building support among discontented nobles and forging secret alliances with Roman merchants who desired more favorable trade agreements. When he finally struck, it was during the festival of Isis, when the royal family would be gathered together for the sacred ceremonies. The scholar's voice grew heavy with the weight of recorded tragedy. The massacre was swift and brutal. The king and queen were murdered before the altar of their ancestors, their bodies left as offerings to legitimize Arakamani's claim. Most of the royal children were killed as well, but the princess, her body was never found. Some said she had been taken captive. Others claimed she had escaped into the desert. The truth was never established. Marcus rose from his chair, pacing to the window that overlooked the bustling streets of Rome. Below, citizens went about their daily business, unaware that in this quiet study, the foundations of his world were crumbling beneath the weight of terrible knowledge. "If this princess were still alive," he said carefully, "what would her existence mean for the current political situation?" "Revolution," Gaius Flavius replied without hesitation. "Arakamani's rule has been marked by cruelty and oppression. The people suffer under his tyranny, and there are constant whispers of rebellion. If the rightful heir were to return, if she could prove her identity and rally the loyal nobles to her cause." He shook his head. "It would mean war, Marcus. A war that could destabilize the entire region and threaten Rome's interests in Africa." Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead. If Zahara was indeed Princess Amanirenas of Dongola, then he was not merely harboring a runaway slave. He was protecting a woman whose very existence could reshape the political map of the known world. The return journey to his villa passed in a haze of conflicted thoughts and growing certainty. Every detail of Zahara's behavior, every glimpse of the education and refinement she tried so hard to hide, every moment of unconscious nobility, all of it pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. The woman he loved, the slave who had captured his heart and soul, was a queen in exile. The evening banquet was a smaller affair than usual, with only a handful of close friends and political allies in attendance. Among the guests was Senator Lucius Cassius, the same man who had been so offended by the wine incident days earlier. Marcus watched with growing tension as Zahara moved through the room, serving wine with her characteristic grace, while Cassius regaled the company with tales of his recent travels. "The barbarian lands grow more civilized with each passing year," Cassius was saying, his voice carrying the casual arrogance that Marcus had once shared, but now found repugnant. "Our recent victories in Nubia have brought order to regions that had known only chaos and tribal warfare. The establishment of proper Roman administration has been a blessing to peoples who had never known the benefits of true civilization." Marcus saw Zahara stiffen at the senator's words, her hands tightening on the amphora she carried. He tried to catch her eye, to warn her to maintain her composure, but she seemed lost in memories that his words had awakened. "Take the kingdom of Dongola, for instance," Cassius continued, oblivious to the effect his words were having. 5 years ago, it was ruled by a weak king who allowed ancient superstitions to guide his policies. Now, under the enlightened leadership of King Arakamani, the region has become one of our most valuable trading partners. The elimination of the old royal family was regrettable but necessary for progress. The amphora slipped from Zahara's nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking thunder. Wine spread across the white stone like spilled blood, and Zahara herself swayed as though struck by an invisible blow. "The children," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "They killed the children first, made us watch. Made us—" Her words dissolved into a keening wail that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, and she collapsed to her knees among the shards of broken pottery. But even as she fell, her mind seemed to transport her to another place, another time, and she began to speak in a language that Marcus now recognized as Meroitic. "Father! Father! They are coming through the gates!" she cried, her voice taking on the desperate tone of a young woman watching her world burn. "The sacred fire! They have defiled the sacred fire! Mother, where are you? Mother!" Marcus was at her side in an instant, gathering her trembling form into his arms, while the guests looked on in shocked silence. Her dark eyes stared at nothing, seeing not the marble floors of his villa, but the blood-soaked stones of a palace half a world away. "The priest," she continued in Meroitic, her voice breaking with anguish. "They cut down the priest at the altar, his blood mixed with the sacred oils. The gods have abandoned us, the gods have—" "Zahara," Marcus said softly, cradling her against his chest. "You are safe. You are here with me. The past cannot hurt you now." Slowly, awareness returned to her eyes, and she looked up at him with an expression of such profound loss that Marcus felt his heart break for her. Around them, the guests murmured among themselves, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and discomfort at this unprecedented display. "Forgive me," Zahara whispered, struggling to regain her composure. "The senator's words, they brought back memories I tried to keep buried." Senator Cassius, his face flushed with wine and indignation, rose from his couch. "This is intolerable. The slave clearly suffers from some form of madness. She should be examined by a physician and properly disciplined for this outburst." "She will be cared for," Marcus said firmly, helping Zahara to her feet. "Helena, please escort her to her quarters and see that she has whatever she needs." As Helena led the still trembling Zahara from the room, Marcus turned to face his guests with a composure he did not feel. "My apologies for the disruption. The girl has suffered greatly in her past, and certain subjects can trigger these episodes. Perhaps we should retire to the garden for the remainder of the evening." The guests gradually dispersed, but Marcus noticed the speculative looks they cast in his direction, and the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. His protection of Zahara had not gone unnoticed, and he knew that tongues would wag in the salons and bathhouses of Rome about the general's unusual interest in a Nubian slave. When the last guest had departed, Marcus made his way to Zahara's quarters, with a heart heavy with dread and determination. He found her sitting on her narrow bed, Helena beside her offering comfort and support. The Greek woman looked up as he entered, her intelligent eyes reflecting a knowledge that matched his own. "Master," Helena said quietly, "I believe it is time for truth." Marcus nodded, settling himself on a simple stool, while Zahara raised her tear-stained face to meet his gaze. In the lamplight, he could see the exhaustion that marked her features. The weight of secrets carried too long. "No more lies," he said gently. "No more half-truths or evasions. I know who you are, Zahara. Or should I say, Princess Amanirenas." The name hung in the air between them like a sword. and Marcus watched as Zahara's carefully constructed defenses finally crumbled completely. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 5 years of hidden grief. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I suspected for days," Marcus replied. "But I was certain only this afternoon, when I consulted a scholar about the royal artifacts of Dongola. Your amulet, your education, your bearing, everything pointed toward the truth." Zahara reached beneath her simple tunic and withdrew the golden ankh that had been hidden against her skin. In the lamplight, the precious metal seemed to glow with inner fire, and Marcus could see the intricate hieroglyphs that marked her royal lineage. "This was my grandmother's," she said, her fingers tracing the sacred symbols, "and her grandmother's before that. It has been passed down through the royal line for 20 generations, each princess adding her own mark to the sacred text." She held out her wrist, revealing the scarification that Marcus had glimpsed before. In the clear light, he could see that it was not merely decorative, but told a story in symbols that spoke of divine right and royal blood. "These marks were made on my 16th birthday," Zahara continued, her voice growing stronger as she finally allowed herself to speak the truth. "Each symbol represents an aspect of my heritage: the lion for courage, the ankh for life, the eye of Horus for wisdom. They cannot be faked or copied, for the ritual that creates them is known only to the high priests of the royal temple." Marcus reached out to touch the sacred marks with reverent fingers, understanding now the magnitude of what she had lost. "Tell me what happened that night," he said softly. "Tell me how a princess of Dongola came to be a slave in Rome." The story that poured from her lips was one of betrayal and horror that surpassed even Marcus's worst imaginings. She spoke of the festival of Isis, when the royal family had gathered to honor their ancestors and renew their sacred vows. She described the moment when Arakamani's soldiers had burst into the temple, their swords already bloody from the slaughter of the guards. "They made us watch," she said, her voice hollow with remembered pain. "Uncle Arakamani wanted us to see what happened to those who stood in his way. He killed my father first, cutting him down before the altar where he had prayed since childhood. Then my mother, who died trying to shield my youngest brother with her body." Marcus felt tears burning in his own eyes as she continued, describing how she had been drugged with a substance that left her conscious but unable to resist, how she had been smuggled out of the kingdom in chains and sold to slave traders who cared nothing for her royal blood. "I woke up on a ship bound for Alexandria," she said, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "By the time the drug wore off, we were already at sea. I tried to tell them who I was, but they only laughed. Who would believe that a chained slave was really a princess?" Helena, who had been listening in horrified silence, finally spoke. "But surely there were those in your kingdom who would have recognized you. Loyal nobles who could have testified to your identity." Zahara's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Arakamani was thorough in his purge. Anyone who might have supported my claim was eliminated or forced to flee. Those who remained were either his allies or too frightened to speak against him." Marcus rose from his stool and began pacing the small chamber, his mind racing with the implications of her revelation. "The scholar told me that Arakamani has been ruling through terror, that the people suffer under his tyranny. If you were to return, if you could prove your identity, I would be dead within a day," Zahara said flatly. "Arakamani cannot allow me to live, Marcus. My very existence threatens everything he has built. As long as I draw breath, his rule will never be secure." The hopelessness in her voice struck Marcus like a physical blow, but it also awakened something fierce and protective within him. "Then we will find another way," he said firmly. "There must be some path that leads to justice." "Justice?" Zahara's eyes flashed with a fire that reminded him of the royal blood that flowed in her veins. What justice is there in this world, Marcus? I have been a slave for 5 years, while my uncle sits on my father's throne and my people suffer under his cruelty. Where was justice when my family was murdered? Where was justice when I was sold like cattle in the markets of Alexandria? The pain in her voice was so raw that Marcus felt it like a knife in his own heart. Without thinking, he knelt beside her bed and took her hands in his, feeling the calluses that slavery had left on her once soft palms. "I cannot undo the past," he said quietly. "I cannot bring back your family or erase the suffering you have endured. But I can offer you something that Arakamani can never take away, my love, my protection, and my vow that you will never be alone again." Zahara looked down at their joined hands, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "You do not understand what you are offering, Marcus. To love me is to court danger not just for yourself, but for everyone you care about. Arakamani has agents throughout the empire, and if he learns that I am alive, then we will face that danger together," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the conviction that had led legions into battle. "I have spent my life serving Rome, fighting for causes that others deemed worthy. For the first time, I have found something worth fighting for that belongs to me alone." The intensity of his declaration seemed to break through Zahara's despair, and she looked at him with wonder shining through her tears. "You would risk everything for a woman who can offer you nothing but trouble and heartache. You offer me far more than that," Marcus said, raising her hands to his lips and pressing gentle kisses to her scarred palms. "You offer me love and purpose and the chance to be something more than just another Roman general drunk on conquest and glory." In the days that followed, their relationship deepened into something that transcended the boundaries of master and slave, Roman and Nubian, conqueror and conquered. In the privacy of Marcus's chambers, Zahara allowed herself to be not just a woman in love, but a queen reclaiming her birthright through the simple act of being truly seen and valued. Marcus traced the ritual scars that marked her royal status with reverent fingers, understanding now that each mark was a piece of history written on her skin. The small tattoos between her shoulder blades told the story of her lineage in symbols that connected her to 20 generations of queens, while the scarification on her wrists and ankles marked her as one chosen by the gods to rule. "You are magnificent," he whispered, as they lay together in the pre-dawn darkness, her head pillowed on his chest and her dark hair spread across his skin like silk. "Not because you are a princess, but because you are you, strong and wise and beautiful beyond measure." It was during one of these intimate moments that Zahara finally found the courage to share the secret that had been growing within her. "Marcus," she said softly, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "There is something else I must tell you." He looked down at her with eyes that held all the tenderness in the world. "What is it, my love?" "I am carrying your child," she said, the words barely above a whisper. "Our child." The revelation struck Marcus like lightning, filling him with a joy so profound that it took his breath away. A child, their child, growing within the woman he loved more than life itself. But even as happiness flooded through him, he understood the terrible complexity of their situation. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "As certain as I can be," Zahara replied. "The signs are unmistakable. Morning sickness, tenderness, the strange combination of exhaustion and restless energy. I have seen it in other women." Marcus pulled her closer, his mind racing with the implications. A child born of their union would be heir to 2 worlds, Roman through his blood, royal Nubian through hers. But what future could such a child have in a world that would see their very existence as an abomination? "What are we going to do?" Zahara asked, voicing the question that haunted them both. "We are going to find a way," Marcus said, with more confidence than he felt. "Somehow, we will find a way to build a future for our child, a future where love matters more than law, where justice triumphs over expedience." But even as he spoke these brave words, Marcus knew that the path ahead would be fraught with dangers that could destroy them all. He had already begun making discreet inquiries through his network of contacts in Egypt and Nubia, seeking information about the current political situation in Dongola and the strength of Arakamani's rule. The reports that came back were uniformly grim. Arakamani had consolidated his power through a reign of terror that had cowed most potential opposition. The kingdom's resources were being systematically plundered to fund his lavish lifestyle and pay his foreign supporters, while the common people suffered under crushing taxation and brutal enforcement. More disturbing still were the hints that certain Roman merchants and politicians had been profiting from the arrangement, providing Arakamani with legitimacy and military support in exchange for favorable trade agreements. The corruption went deeper than Marcus had imagined, reaching into the very heart of the empire he had served so faithfully. But there were also whispers of hope, reports of secret gatherings in remote villages, of old nobles who remembered the rightful queen and waited for her return. The people had not forgotten their true rulers, and many would rally to Zahara's banner if she could prove her identity and provide leadership for their cause. It was Helena who brought the news that would change everything. She appeared in Marcus's study one evening with an expression of barely controlled excitement, clutching a scroll that bore the seal of the Imperial Messenger Service. "Master," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her news, "a Nubian diplomatic mission has arrived in Rome. They seek an audience with the Senate to formalize trade agreements between Dongola and the Empire." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "Who leads this mission?" "Representatives of King Arakamani," Helena replied, her eyes reflecting the same fear that gripped Marcus's heart. "They arrived this afternoon and have been granted quarters in the diplomatic district. Among their number is a man called Kemweset, who is said to be the king's most trusted enforcer." The name struck Zahara like a physical blow when Marcus shared the news with her. She went pale as moonlight, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table for support. "Kemweset," she whispered, her voice hollow with remembered terror. "He was my father's captain of guards once. Before Uncle Arakamani corrupted him with promises of gold and power, he knows my face as well as his own." Marcus felt the walls closing in around them as the full implications of the situation became clear. Arakamani's men were in Rome, possibly hunting for the princess, whose continued existence threatened everything they had built. The careful sanctuary that Marcus had created for Zahara was no longer safe, and time was running out. "We have to leave," Zahara said, rising from her chair with sudden decision. "Tonight, before they have a chance to search the city. I will not let my presence here endanger you or anyone else in this household." "No," Marcus said firmly, catching her hands and holding them tight. "We will not run like criminals in the night. If Arakamani wants to face the rightful queen of Dongola, then let him do so openly, before the Senate and people of Rome." "You do not understand," Zahara protested. "Kemweset is not just a soldier, he is an assassin trained in the arts of silent death. If he finds me, I will simply disappear, and no one will ever know what became of the last princess of Dongola." But Marcus's jaw was set with the determination that had made him one of Rome's greatest generals. "Then we will have to make sure he does not find you," he said. "Helena, how much time do we have before this delegation begins their formal activities?" "They are scheduled to address the Senate in 3 days," Helena replied. "Until then, they will likely remain in their quarters, preparing their presentations and meeting with various officials." 3 days, Marcus mused. Enough time to gather evidence, to build a case, to prepare for what may be the most important battle of my life. As the 3 conspirators planned their desperate strategy, none of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the corridor outside Marcus's study. Gaius Flavius had been listening at the door, his mind racing with the possibilities that this information presented. The overseer had long resented his master's protection of the Nubian slave, and now he understood why Marcus had been so inexplicably drawn to her. A princess in hiding, a diplomatic crisis, the potential for scandal that could destroy a general's career. These were valuable commodities in the political marketplace of Rome. As he slipped away into the darkness, Gaius was already calculating how much such information might be worth to the right buyer. The Nubian delegation would pay handsomely for news of their missing princess, and there were others in Rome who would find such intelligence equally valuable. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the bonds of love, loyalty, and honor. In the days to come, Zahara would have to choose between the safety of hiding and the dangerous path of reclaiming her birthright. Marcus would face the greatest challenge of his military career, not on a battlefield, but in the treacherous political arena of Rome itself. And somewhere in the diplomatic quarter of the Eternal City, Caemwaset sharpened his blade and prepared to complete the mission that had brought him halfway across the world. The last princess of Dongola had evaded death for 5 years, but her luck was about to run out. The crown that lay hidden beneath the chains was about to be revealed, and with it would come consequences that none of them could fully foresee. Love and duty, justice and survival, the personal and the political, all would collide in a crescendo of passion and peril that would determine not just their individual fates, but the destiny of kingdoms. The vibrant chaos of the Roman marketplace, a symphony of hawkers' cries, merchants haggling, and the endless shuffle of humanity, usually served as a balm to Caemwaset's troubled spirit. Yet, on this particular sun-drenched afternoon, the familiar sounds offered no solace. His assignment to the Dongolan diplomatic mission was a gilded cage, forcing him to serve the usurper, Arakamani, while his heart bled for the royal family he had once sworn to protect. He moved through the throng, his sharp, dark eyes, accustomed to scanning for threats in the Nubian deserts, now searching for shadows and whispers in this foreign city. Then, amidst the bustling crowd near a stall laden with exotic spices, he saw her. His breath caught, a gasp trapped in his throat. It was merely a glimpse, a fleeting moment as she turned to inspect a bolt of linen, her back to him. She was dressed plainly, a simple Roman tunic of undyed wool, her hair covered by a modest veil. Nothing about her screamed royalty, nothing suggested the radiant presence of the princess he remembered. But the way her hand, slender and graceful, rose unconsciously to touch her left wrist, just above the subtle swell of bone, betrayed her. He knew that gesture. He had seen it countless times, a habit of childhood, a princess idly touching the sacred scarification that only her royal lineage possessed. Even from a distance, he could almost feel the phantom etching of the ankh and other sacred symbols beneath her skin. He knew that wrist, those hands. He knew her, Kandake Zahara, alive. A wave of conflicting emotions, sharp as desert glass, crashed over Caemwaset. Guilt, bitter and suffocating, for the oaths he had broken, for the family he had failed to save. Hope, fragile yet incandescent, that the true line might endure. And terror, cold and absolute, at the ramifications of her survival for Arakamani, for himself, for the tenuous peace in Dongola. He did not call out, he did not approach. His instincts, honed by years as a royal guard, screamed caution. To alert Arakamani's other agents now, before he understood the full scope of her situation, would be a death sentence for her, and perhaps for himself. He melted deeper into the shadows of a nearby archway, his eyes dark as polished obsidian, never leaving her as she moved, a ghost from his past, through the Roman crowd. He would follow, he would observe, he would understand. Meanwhile, in the opulent chambers of the Senate, the diplomatic mission from Dongola, led by Arakamani's most trusted and treacherous advisors, presented their case for a formalized alliance with Rome. Silver-tongued orators painted a picture of a flourishing, stable kingdom, now thriving under King Arakamani's enlightened leadership. They spoke of the unfortunate but necessary reforms that followed the untimely passing of the previous royal family, implying a natural transition rather than a bloody coup. Senator Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Marcus's friend, listened with a discerning ear, his gaze occasionally drifting to Marcus, who sat unusually silent and distracted among his fellow senators. Lucius had noticed a profound change in the decorated general since his return. Marcus was quieter, more brooding, his once sharp focus seemingly diffused by some hidden turmoil. The senator, a man of keen observation himself, suspected Marcus was embroiled in a deeply personal struggle, one far removed from the battlefields. The Dongolan delegation, however, was persuasive. They offered lucrative trade deals, access to vast gold mines, rare incense, and a seemingly endless supply of skilled labor that made several Roman senators, their faces flushed with the promise of immense wealth, eager to formalize the alliance. Whispers of enormous personal fortunes to be made danced like fireflies in the air of the Senate chamber. The very idea of solidifying Rome's economic interests in such a vital region seemed too good to pass up, eclipsing any lingering questions about the legitimacy of Arachimani's ascension. As night descended like a silken cloak over the city, casting long, conspiring shadows, the calm of Marcus's villa was shattered. Gaius Flavius, seething with resentment over Marcus's protection of Zahara and his own recently exposed improprieties in the villa's accounts, saw his chance for revenge. He had been quietly gathering information, feeding his insidious suspicions with observations of Marcus's unusual attentiveness to the Nubian slave. When he learned of the Nubian delegation's presence in Rome and their clandestine inquiries about any lingering members of the old royal family, Gaius saw his opportunity. Driven by a blend of self-preservation, greed, and spite, he secretly contacted Arachimani's representatives, revealing Zahara's presence in Marcus's household. He painted her as a dangerous, bewitching influence on the general, weaving a tale that confirmed their worst fears while igniting their murderous intent. This treacherous betrayal led to assassins infiltrating Marcus's villa under cover of darkness. They moved like wraiths through the quiet corridors, their blades gleaming faintly in the moonlight filtering through arched windows. But Zahara, her senses honed by years of living on the edge, sensed their presence. A rustle, a whisper of displaced air, a shadow too deep in a corner. Instincts long dormant in the forced calm of slavery flared to life. She moved silently, a whisper of motion through familiar passages, secret staircases and hidden alcoves Marcus himself had never known existed, spaces once used by servants to avoid the gaze of masters, now a lifeline for a hunted queen. Helena, awakened by the commotion, found Zahara in a hidden passage and, without a moment's hesitation, joined her, proving her loyalty not with words but with courageous action, guiding her through the labyrinthine depths of the villa to safety. The attack failed, the assassins retreating into the Roman night, but the message was stark and chillingly clear. Arachimani knew she was alive, and he would stop at nothing to eliminate her. Marcus, a seasoned general, immediately initiated a full-scale investigation. The failed attack, so precise and targeted, spoke of an inside informant. His military mind, accustomed to dissecting battle strategies, now turned to the intricacies of domestic betrayal. It did not take long for the threads of evidence to lead him to Gaius Flavius. The overseer's recent complaints, his calculating glances, his sudden disappearance after the alarm was raised, all clicked into place. Marcus, his face a mask of grim determination, swiftly had Gaius apprehended. The confession, extracted under duress, confirmed his deepest fears. His own trusted overseer had betrayed him, placing Zahara in mortal danger. Gaius was summarily dismissed and exiled, his treachery too heinous for any lesser punishment. With Gaius gone, Marcus utilized his vast network of military connections to surround Zahara with protection. Legionaries loyal to him guarded the villa, their presence a formidable deterrent, but Marcus realized with a cold knot of dread that Rome itself was no longer safe for her. Her existence, now known to Arachimani, transformed her into a walking target. He began planning to move Zahara to a secure, remote location where she could truly be safe, where her pregnancy could progress in peace. However, every plan was complicated by the intricate web of Roman law. Zahara was legally his property, a slave. Freeing her officially would raise a multitude of questions Marcus could not answer without exposing her identity, which would, in turn, ignite a political firestorm that could consume them both. He was caught between his duty as a Roman and his desperate need to protect the woman he loved. As the days turned into a week, an unexpected proposal arrived from the Nubian delegation. King Arachimani, they announced to the Senate, wished to solidify his alliance with Rome through a personal union. He offered to marry a Roman noblewoman of suitable standing. The idea was met with enthusiastic approval by many senators, eager for a formal bond that promised unparalleled prosperity. But privately, a different, far more sinister offer was extended to Marcus. Arachimani's chief envoy, a man whose smile never reached his cold eyes, approached Marcus in a hushed conversation. "General," he purred, "we understand you possess certain assets that rightfully belong to Dongola. We are prepared to negotiate for their peaceful return. We believe this arrangement would be mutually beneficial, avoiding unpleasantness." The thinly veiled threat was unmistakable. Arachimani's desperation was palpable. He needed Zahara dead to secure his legitimacy, but he also feared the political consequences of openly murdering a Roman general's property on Roman soil. He sought a quiet, discreet solution, a way to make her disappear without leaving a trace that could be tied back to him or his Roman allies. The pressure mounted, suffocating and relentless. Zahara, acutely aware of the danger she brought to Marcus, to his household, and now to the fragile, secret life growing within her, made a devastating decision. She paced her small chamber, the rhythm of her footsteps echoing the frantic beat of her heart. She could not bear to be the cause of his ruin, to bring calamity upon the man who had shown her more kindness than any other since her capture. Her mind, sharp and strategic, saw only one path to protect him, to protect their child, her own sacrifice. She would surrender herself willingly to Arachimani's men, believing her death would end the threat to Marcus and the child. With trembling fingers, she found a scrap of papyrus and a reed pen. The words flowed from her, a letter to Marcus explaining her impossible choice, her profound love, and her desperate hope for his future. She sealed it with a drop of wax, a tear falling beside it. She prepared to meet her uncle's men, intending to disappear into the night, a silent ghost. But as she opened the secret passage leading from her room, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness. It was Waset. He stood before her, his face a complex tapestry of sorrow, determination, and a glimmer of hope. "Kandake," he whispered, a title he had not uttered in 5 long years. "Do not do this. Do not surrender. You do not have to die for this. There is another way. I will help you reclaim your throne, not perish for it." His true loyalty, long buried beneath layers of forced servitude and guilt, finally rose to the surface. At that very moment, Marcus, driven by a premonition, burst into her chamber. He had read the desperate message in her eyes, seen the unusual quiet determination that bespoke a final, tragic resolve. His gaze swept from Zahara's tear-streaked face to Waset, standing before the secret passage. "Zahara!" he cried, his voice laced with terror and relief. He rushed to her, pulling her into his arms, his heart pounding against hers. She clung to him, then looked up, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of anguish and fierce love. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I am pregnant. It is your child." The words, though Marcus had suspected them, still struck him with the force of a physical blow, grounding him in a reality more profound than any battle. Captivated, witnessing their embrace, stepped forward, his resolve solidified. "General Maximus," he said, his voice clear and resonant, "I can testify before the Senate. She is Princess Amanirenas, the rightful queen of Dongola. I have evidence of Arachimani's crimes, of his bloody coup, and of the corrupt Roman merchants who aided him in his usurpation." Just as the pieces of this extraordinary alliance fell into place, the villa vibrated with the heavy thud of marching boots. Marcus and Zahara looked at each other, their faces reflecting the grim realization that they had been outmaneuvered. The Nubian delegation, having failed to secure Zahara's discreet elimination, had played their final desperate card. Roman soldiers, acting on official orders influenced by senators with lucrative financial interests in Arachimani's regime, surrounded the villa. The delegation had convinced certain powerful figures in Rome that Marcus was harboring a dangerous fugitive who threatened the new, profitable alliance with Dongola. They claimed legal authority to search his property and reclaim what they asserted belonged to Dongola. The main gates of the villa burst open, revealing the stern faces of the centurions and legionaries, and there at the forefront stood Lucius Cornelius Sulla, his expression a mixture of grim duty and profound conflict. He had been sent to oversee this reclamation, torn between his loyalty to the Roman state and his friendship with Marcus. As soldiers closed in, the villa, once a sanctuary, became a trap. Marcus and Zahara stood side by side, facing their darkest moment. Everything seemed lost, her true identity exposed, their forbidden love discovered, and their unborn child's future hanging by a thread. But in this moment of despair, as the harsh Roman light illuminated her face, Zahara found a flicker of her true strength, remembering that she was not just a woman in love, but a queen with a sacred duty to her people. Beside her, Captivated stepped forward, his head held high, ready to reveal the truth that had been buried for too long. And just behind him, Helena, her intelligent eyes wide with apprehension but unwavering loyalty, clutched a scroll, ancient texts confirming royal lineages, evidence that could change everything. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation, not in the shadows, but under the unforgiving gaze of Rome. The thunder of Roman boots ceased abruptly, leaving an unnerving silence that amplified the frantic beating of Marcus's heart. The air in the grand atrium of his villa, usually still and heavy with the scent of aged marble, now crackled with unspoken tension. Roman legionaries, their faces impassive beneath their helmets, stood poised for command, while behind them the Nubian delegation, led by Arachimani's smirking envoys, watched with predatory anticipation. Senator Lucius Cornelius Sulla, his face etched with conflict, stood at the forefront, his eyes meeting Marcus's across the fraught distance. It was a moment poised on the razor's edge, where duty clashed with destiny, and the fate of kingdoms hung precariously. Zahara, feeling Marcus's protective arm around her, felt a surge of warmth, a profound connection that transcended the chaos. She had prepared for this, had braced herself for the inevitable, but now a quiet resolve, fierce and unyielding, bloomed within her chest. This was not the end. It was the beginning. She was no longer a slave cowering from her past. She was a queen reclaiming her future. With a strength that surprised even Marcus, Zahara stepped forward, her bronze skin luminous against the pale Roman stone, her dark eyes flashing with an inner fire that silenced every murmur. The simple tunic she wore, a symbol of her servitude, now seemed to fall away, revealing the regal bearing that had been hidden for 5 long years. She looked directly at the centurion in charge, her voice ringing clear and resonant through the vast space. "I am Amanirenas, Princess of Dongola," she declared, her Latin flawless, each syllable pronounced with the authority of one born to command. A collective gasp rippled through the Roman soldiers, some of whom looked to Lucius for confirmation, others simply stunned. Then with a subtle shift in her voice, she continued, her words now flowing in the ancient, melodious tones of Meroitic, addressing the Nubian delegation directly. Let the truth be heard, for the gods themselves demand it. A profound silence descended, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from Arakamani's envoys, their smirks vanishing, replaced by expressions of shock and dawning horror. They had expected a fearful slave, easily subdued. Instead, they faced a queen. Lucius, quick to seize the moment, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence with senatorial authority. By the laws of Rome, any claim to sovereign status, especially one pertaining to a kingdom with which Rome seeks alliance, demands a full and impartial inquiry. This is not a matter for summary seizure. He looked pointedly at the Nubian delegation. We shall convene an impromptu tribunal here, at the villa of General Maximus at once. Let justice be served, and let the truth illuminate the path forward. His words, though framed in Roman law, were a lifeline, buying time and validating Zahara's audacious declaration. What followed was an extraordinary spectacle, an impromptu trial held in the grand atrium of Marcus's villa, now transformed into a makeshift court. Roman senators, their togas rustling with every movement, took their places on makeshift benches. Nubian diplomats, their faces a mixture of fear and feigned indifference, stood rigid. Military officials, their stern faces reflecting the gravity of the situation, observed every detail. The air thrummed with a tension more palpable than any battle. Zahara stood before them, not as a defendant but as an accuser. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, swept across the faces of her audience, holding each one captive. She began to speak, her voice weaving a narrative of betrayal and survival that captivated even the most hardened senators. She presented her evidence not with desperation, but with the quiet confidence of one stating irrefutable facts. First, she held up the golden ankh, the sacred amulet that Marcus had only glimpsed. This is the ankh of Natakamani, passed down through 20 generations of my family, she proclaimed, the gold shimmering in the lamplight. It bears the unique hieroglyphs of my birth, symbols known only to the royal scribes and to those of true blood. She spoke of the sacred rituals of its creation, details that would be impossible for an outsider to invent. Next, she spoke of secrets, whispered only within the royal family, details of treasury movements, ancient treaties with neighboring tribes, and the precise lineage of the sacred white elephants of Dongola, knowledge that no mere merchant's daughter, much less a slave, could possibly possess. Her words painted a vivid picture of a world beyond Roman comprehension, a world she commanded. Then, with a quiet dignity that moved many, she extended her left arm, revealing the intricate scarification on her wrist. These marks, she said, her voice soft yet firm, were etched into my skin on my 16th birthday, a sacred rite of passage. Each line, each curve, signifies my divine right to rule, my connection to the gods of Dongola. They cannot be replicated, for the ritual is known only to the high priests of our temple. As she spoke, Helena, her eyes shining with fierce pride and loyalty, stepped forward, unrolling a scroll of ancient texts. Master senators and honored diplomats, she declared, her voice clear despite its tremor. I, Helena, humble librarian to General Maximus, can confirm the authenticity of these sacred symbols. My studies of ancient Egyptian and Nubian texts, found in the general's very own library, corroborate the details of the royal scarification rituals of Dongola. These texts, hundreds of years old, describe precisely these markings and their significance. The Nubian delegation, their faces contorted with fury and desperation, attempted to interject, to discredit her, but their sputtering protests only served to underscore the truth of Zahara's claims. Their very panic was evidence. Then in the trial's turning point, a ripple of astonishment swept through the assembly as Waset, once the loyal captain, now the symbol of Arakamani's ruthlessness, stepped forward. His hardened features showed a flicker of the profound guilt that had tormented him. He knelt before Zahara, a gesture of profound submission and reverence. "Kandake," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgive my forced allegiance. My heart has always known its true queen." Rising, he turned to face the assembly, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I, Waset, served King Natakamani, father of Princess Amanirinas, with loyalty and honor. I was there on that cursed night, 5 years ago, during the festival of Isis. I witnessed Arakamani's treachery, his bloody usurpation. He collaborated with corrupt Roman merchants, men whose names I possess," he declared, listing several prominent Roman families whose faces paled visibly, who provided him with arms and gold in exchange for exclusive trading rights to Dongola's riches. They helped him overthrow the legitimate rulers. Princess Amanirenas was specifically targeted for elimination, for her very existence threatened his illegitimate rule. My own family was held hostage, General Maximus, forcing me to serve the usurper, but no longer. I have the ledgers, the coded messages, the evidence of their illegal arms deals that violate Senate treaties. His words were a physical blow, exposing a web of corruption that stretched from Dongola's desert sands to the marbled halls of Rome. The Roman senators were plunged into a profound dilemma. Their trade agreement with Arakamani, once seen as a golden opportunity, now reeked of blood and illicit dealings. Marcus seized the moment, his voice resonating with conviction. "Senators, Rome prides itself on justice, on honor. Can we stand by and allow such a heinous crime to be rewarded? Can we ally ourselves with a tyrant who murdered his own family with the aid of Roman criminals? Rome's honor demands that we support the rightful queen, that we restore justice to a land that has suffered under usurpation." Lucius, witnessing Marcus's impassioned plea and the mounting evidence, stepped forward, his voice adding its weight to the scales of justice. "General Maximus speaks truth, honored senators. The involvement of Roman citizens in this atrocity is a stain upon our reputation. To ignore this evidence, to continue to legitimize a murderer, would be an act of profound dishonor. The integrity of our future alliances, indeed the very soul of Rome, is at stake." His political influence, combined with Marcus's unwavering integrity, began to sway the wavering senators. The scandal of the Roman merchant involvement overshadowed any immediate financial gain from Arakamani. Then came the moment of truth, a silence so profound that a falling feather would have sounded like thunder. Zahara, rather than facing an impossible choice between love and duty, surprised everyone with a brilliant political maneuver. Her gaze, filled with ancient wisdom and modern resolve, swept across the Roman senators. "Honored Romans," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I accept your recognition as the rightful queen of Dongola. But I do not seek a marriage of subjugation, nor do I wish to be a mere vassal state. I propose a revolutionary alliance, Dongola and Rome, as partners, as equals." A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembly. Such an idea was unprecedented, but Zahara continued, her words weaving a vision of a shared future. "I am carrying the child of a Roman hero, General Marcus Aurelius Maximus. Our son, or daughter, will be a bridge between our two great civilizations, symbolizing a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, not conquest." The revelation of her pregnancy, delivered with such calm power, silenced all dissent. It was a masterstroke, transforming a potential weakness into a formidable strength, a promise of a future intertwined, not one imposed. Marcus, his heart swelling with pride and an overwhelming sense of destiny, watched her, completely mesmerized. He knew then, beyond any doubt, that this woman was truly born to rule. He made his own sacrifice, a transformation born of profound love and duty. He volunteered to lead a Roman military expedition to restore Zahara to her throne, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, supporting the legitimate ruler of Dongola. This noble act allowed him to remain by Zahara's side during the crucial period of restoration, serving Rome's highest ideals while fulfilling his deepest desires. The Senate, deeply impressed by Zahara's intelligence and Marcus's unwavering commitment to justice, approved the mission, seeing it as a way to correct the illegal actions of the corrupt merchants and establish a more honorable, equitable relationship with Dongola. The new alliance was forged in that moment. Arakamani's representatives were arrested for fraud and conspiracy, their faces twisting with impotent rage as they were led away. Their Roman collaborators, their names now publicly disgraced, were likewise apprehended, their illicit gains confiscated, their power shattered. Gaius Flavius, now a miserable outcast, received his formal banishment for treason, his petty ambitions utterly crushed. Helena, her loyal service now repaid, was granted her freedom, and without hesitation chose to accompany Zahara as her personal scribe and trusted advisor, eager to witness the restoration of a true queen. Lucius, his integrity vindicated, became the Senate's official liaison for this new African policy, ensuring the continued support for the legitimate government of Dongola. Marcus and Zahara did not have to part. Their love, born in the shadows of slavery and deceit, had forged a new path that beautifully intertwined duty and desire. She was no longer a broken slave, but a queen who would rule with wisdom and compassion, supported by the man she loved, by her loyal general Caemwasit, and by the principles of justice Marcus had championed. He was no longer just a conqueror, but a protector of justice, a Roman who had found a way to serve his empire's highest ideals while embracing a love that transcended every convention. Caemwasit, his soul finally at peace, became her most trusted general, fiercely loyal, serving his true queen with unwavering honor. 1 year later, the city of Dongola flourished under Queen Amanirenas. Her coronation had been a joyous event, attended by Roman dignitaries and loyal Nubian nobles. Marcus stood proudly by her side, not only as her husband, but as Rome's first ambassador to the newly restored kingdom of Dongola. Their daughter, born free and royal, a beautiful child with her mother's dark, discerning eyes and her father's strong, Roman chin, embodied the new alliance between their peoples. Lucius's latest letter, filled with news of Rome, arrived just as the queen held their child. He announced that the Senate, impressed by Dongola's prosperity and stability, had formally adopted the Dongola model for future relationships with African kingdoms, partnerships based on respect rather than conquest. Some chains are forged by circumstance, others by choice, but the strongest bonds of all are those we forge with love, honor, and hope. In the end, Zahara learned that true freedom isn't the absence of duty, but the power to choose which duties define us. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, love and duty can become one and the same. In their daughter's eyes, Roman blue touched with Nubian gold, the future looked bright with possibility. 1 year had unfolded like a precious scroll since the fateful tribunal in Marcus's Roman villa, a year that had seen the impossible made real, and two disparate worlds begin to weave a new tapestry of destiny. In the heart of Dongola, amidst the golden sands and the life-giving embrace of the Nile, Queen Amanirenas reigned. The restored palace, once stained with the blood of her family, now shimmered with the brilliance of hope and renewal, its ancient stones echoing with the laughter of children and the murmur of a people finding their voice once more. Zahara, the woman who had captivated a Roman general's hardened heart, had become the queen her mother had always known she would be. Her days were a delicate dance between ancient tradition and necessary reform. She walked among her people, not as a distant monarch, but as a compassionate ruler, her keen intelligence applied to the daily challenges of governance, from ensuring the fairness of grain distribution to establishing new schools where both boys and girls could learn, a testament to her own cherished education. The ritual scars on her wrist, once a mark of her hidden royal lineage, were now openly displayed, a beacon of legitimacy, of survival, and of the enduring spirit of Dongola. Her people, who had suffered under Arakamani's tyranny, flocked to her, their devotion a balm to her long-held pain. Beside her, in every council meeting and every public appearance, stood Marcus Aurelius Maximus, not as a conqueror, but as Rome's first ambassador to the free kingdom of Dongola. His imperial toga, a symbol of Roman might, now blended seamlessly with the vibrant Nubian silks, a visual metaphor for the alliance they had forged. His presence was a constant reminder to both Romans and Dongolans that a new era had dawned, one founded on respect and mutual benefit. The transition from general to diplomat had not been without its challenges, for the subtle complexities of court politics were often more intricate than any battlefield strategy. Yet he embraced this new role with the same dedication that had won him legions, driven by a purpose far grander than mere conquest. He served Rome by serving Dongola, believing that true strength lay not in domination, but in alliance. The coldness that had settled in his heart after years of war had melted away, replaced by the warmth of a life filled with love and profound meaning. Their love, born in the crucible of secrets and danger, had not merely withstood the passage of time. It had deepened, blossoming into a bond that transcended cultures and cemented destinies. In the quiet hours, after the demands of the day had receded, they would often seek solace in the palace gardens, where the scent of desert jasmine mingled with the cool night air. There, under the vast, star-strewn sky, Marcus would trace the delicate lines of Zahara's hand, his touch a silent language of devotion. Their conversations were no longer fraught with hidden truths, but filled with the shared joys and burdens of leadership, the intimate whispers of two souls irrevocably entwined. The sensuality between them was in the brush of shoulders, the lingering gaze, the shared laughter that spoke volumes of their unwavering connection. They were a testament that love, when rooted in understanding and respect, could indeed bridge the widest of chasms. And they had children. A little girl, her skin the rich bronze of her mother, her hair a cascade of dark curls, but with eyes the startling grey-blue of her Roman father. They had named her Amanis, a blending of worlds, a living symbol of the Dongola model. Her laughter echoed through the ancient halls, a joyful sound that banished the lingering ghosts of tragedy. Zahara would often watch Marcus with their daughter, his strong hands, once skilled in wielding a sword, now tenderly cradling the small child, a profound tenderness in his eyes. It was in these moments that she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice, that their path, however perilous, had led them to a happiness beyond measure. Society, both in Dongola and in Rome's perception of the distant African kingdoms, began to shift. The Dongola model, championed by Lucius Cornelius Sulla in the Roman Senate, began to gain traction. Other African kingdoms, witnessing Dongola's rapid prosperity and the respectful partnership it had forged with Rome, sent envoys seeking similar alliances, challenging the old paradigm of brutal subjugation. Trade flourished along the Nile, bringing wealth and stability to regions that had long suffered under oppressive rule or exploitation. The wisdom of Queen Amanirenas became legendary, her fair judgments and strategic vision admired even by her former adversaries. Not everyone, of course, had emerged unscathed. Arakamani and his treacherous Roman conspirators had paid a high price for their decisions. Stripped of their wealth and power, publicly disgraced and banished to remote, unforgiving outposts, their names became cautionary tales whispered in the shadowed corridors of power. Justice, often elusive, had found its way. Gaius Flavius, the petty overseer, lived out his miserable days in obscure exile, a forgotten footnote in the grand tapestry of events. Helena, now Queen Amanirenas' personal scribe and advisor, had found her true calling. Her intelligence, once confined to Marcus's library, now served a kingdom, helping to organize its archives, draft diplomatic correspondence, and preserve the rich history that Zahara was now creating. She moved through the palace with a quiet dignity, her loyalty to Zahara unwavering, a bond forged in shared secrets and dangerous truths. Khaimwaset, the loyal general, had proven his redemption 1,000 times over. He rebuilt the Dongolan army, instilling in it principles of honor and defense, ensuring his queen's peace. He was not only a skilled military leader, but also a trusted confidant, his past guilt replaced by an unshakable devotion to the rightful queen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Dongolan sky in hues of fiery orange and soft rose, Zahara would often stand with Marcus on the palace balcony, their hands clasped. The world had shifted, irrevocably, because two people dared to defy convention, to love without boundaries, and to fight for a justice that transcended their assigned roles. The echoes of Rome's triumph and her own brutal past still resonated, but now they were accompanied by the triumphant song of a kingdom reborn, of a love that defied all odds. Some chains are forged by circumstance, others by choice. But the strongest bonds of all are those we forge with love, honor, and hope. In the end, Zahara learned that true freedom isn't the absence of duty, but the power to choose which duties define us. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, love and duty can become one and the same. In their daughter's eyes, Roman blue touched with Nubian gold, the future looked bright with possibility. And so, dear friends, our epic journey through the heart of ancient Rome and the golden sands of Dongola comes to a close. What a magnificent tapestry of love, courage, and destiny we have woven together. From the moment General Marcus Aurelius Maximus found his world irrevocably changed by the mysterious, dignified slave Zahara, we've witnessed how true connection defies every barrier of status and expectation. Their story isn't just a romance, it's a testament to the unyielding power of love to transform, to inspire, and to challenge the very foundations of society. Through Zahara's unwavering strength, we learned that true nobility is not inherited, but forged in the fires of adversity. She reminded us that our worth is never defined by our chains, but by the fire within our spirit and the truth we carry in our souls. And through Marcus, we saw how even the most hardened hearts can be softened by genuine affection, how duty can evolve beyond conquest to become a force for justice and honor. His sacrifice, his willingness to risk everything for the woman he loved, and the truth she represented, speaks volumes about the capacity for change and redemption within us all. Their triumph, and the birth of their precious daughter Amanis, is a vibrant beacon of hope. It teaches us that compassion, understanding, and the courage to build bridges between disparate worlds can lead to a future far richer and more harmonious than any born of division or greed. Justice, though sometimes slow, can indeed prevail. This story, Chains of Gold, is more than just a tale. It's a mirror reflecting the timeless struggles and triumphs of the human spirit. It asks us, what are the chains that bind us, and what are we willing to risk to break free and build a life rooted in love and truth? Now, I want to hear your thoughts. What moment resonated most with you? Which character's journey touched your heart the deepest? And what lessons did you take away from Marcus and Zahara's incredible saga? To know who stayed with us until the very end, and to help us share more stories like this, please type the word bridge in the comments below. And if your heart yearns for more tales of forbidden love, epic struggles, and destinies fulfilled, make sure to check out the other narratives I've linked in the cards above. Thank you for embarking on this unforgettable adventure with us. May your own lives be filled with the courage to love, the wisdom to build bridges, and the strength to forge your own golden destiny. Until next time.